Last week we looked at a government generator, but let's try using it for real in our next Galaxy 24. Thank you all for joining us again here today on Husky County for another Galaxy 24. In this series, we take a look at all different kinds of star system, world building, and other tools that you could use in your own forms of sci-fi world building for games or campaign settings and all kinds of stuff like that. Today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be continuing our look at Levoid's Government Generator. This time, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using it to create a government for, I guess you could call it a small cluster of star systems that kind of work together in a government. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be testing out a number of the different elements and alternative rules that Levoid's Government Generator provided us. So for example, I'm going to be using some extra responsibilities, going beyond what is in the base game and even going beyond what's included in the sort of science fiction or modern government section. We're going to be utilizing different levels of authority. We're going to be utilizing some of the optional rules where we can mix and match sort of government institutions and privately owned institutions, and potentially integrating some elements of confederation. But we'll see how well things go. So here is our chart with our responsibilities starting at the top here in this box. You will notice that there are a significant number more than would be typically included. This is probably honestly a little bit too much, but I did want to break some of these apart in part because of the sort of world building that I kind of have in my head for this particular thing, and also to provide the opportunity for taking some duties that might normally be seen as being closely associated with one another and breaking them up. So if we take a look here, you'll see we have let's start over here on the right. We have border security, external affairs. So that would be basically interfacing with governments outside of this one. So yes, this includes like diplomacy and stuff, but I'm also thinking external affairs could apply to, I'm thinking that this is probably a government for a star cluster that actually is within another sort of larger polity or alliance or confederation. So external affairs would not only be dealing with foreign affairs with separate independent countries, but also foreign affairs within the sort of supranational institution that exists. Some of these other ones are pretty obvious, like housing, research, education, health, justice, trade, military, and espionage. You'll notice that I separated trade and internal economics. I'm thinking that the internal economics might be basically an organization that promotes economic development. Another thing that you'll notice that I have done is I've separated planetary infrastructure, space infrastructure, and digital infrastructure. One of the reasons for that is this kind of takes place in the same world or setting as some of my previous games like Urkat kind of take place in, and in that particular instance there are like whole polities that are entirely digital, or entire societies that have completely digitized themselves. They might have originally been living beings, but they digitized themselves a very long time ago, or they might have been entirely AI from the beginning, sentient AIs and stuff like that. So that's why there's a separate individual digital infrastructure sort of government potentially, or institution that might be handling that separately from what you might see for planetary or space infrastructure. We have space building. One thing that I also intentionally did is I separated the internal intelligence and security, espionage, military, and border security with the idea that those could potentially be separated out into different institutions. So here's what we'll do. What we're supposed to do is we're supposed to basically go for each and every single one of these responsibilities, roll a d6, and it may be potentially sorted out into each of these 6 institutions, depending upon, of course, our role. That's going to take a little while with this mini, so I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick off screen, and I will join you as soon as we're done. Alrighty, welcome back. So I went ahead and, as I mentioned, I was rolling a d6 and moved each of those different responsibilities from the top down to here. So we'll hop through them all real quick. And my first sort of gut instinct interpretation of what exactly might be happening here. So here for institution number 1, you'll see that this is the institution that's going to be in charge of internal economics, digital infrastructure, and trade. Yeah, it generally makes sense. It also would potentially make sense for this to be a private institution, or maybe it's the reason why they're in charge of all of this and digital infrastructure is maybe because this is some sort of consortium of like AI or various things, or some sort of AI advocacy group that has essentially become a government institution as a result of their power and influence over the economy and digital life forms. Our second one here. This one's actually quite interesting. So we have space infrastructure, shipbuilding, military, and external affairs. The first 3 seem to jive pretty well together. So this is clearly some sort of institution that basically has the highest amount of influence when we're dealing with space itself. Presumably it has some form of regulation and stuff with that. The external affairs is kind of interesting. It would seem to suggest that maybe military is more of like in a defensive capacity, where essentially it's like a self-defense force. So basically this institution is in charge of everything involving space and potentially outside of the solar system or small element of the space cluster that this country would be existing in. Institution 3, here we have justice, natural resources, and education. Again, this one seems like a bit of a weird mix, but to me, it seems like, by justice, maybe we're enforcing a form of equality. So it would therefore make sense that they potentially have at least some control over the natural resources and education, because essentially it's investments into the future. So, you could kind of see this as being like an amalgamation of, if we're looking at the United States government, basically the Department of Education, the Department of Justice, and the Department of the Interior, with a primary focus of investing, again, as I mentioned, in the future. So like in the children, that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, the justice makes sure that it's free and fair for everybody. The natural resources, of course, so that's more attempting to preserve enough natural resources for the future that in order to maintain the, stability of the society. And of course education is of course preparing the people needed in order to again prepare for that future. So this could be some sort of future centric or foresight centric institution. Institution number 4, this one's pretty classic. We have espionage and internal intelligence and security mixed together. So essentially this is like CIA and FBI meet and had a kid. It's basically what this is. Yeah, not a whole lot more to kind of dive into there. Institution number 5, we have housing and planetary infrastructure combined together. That of course makes sense. So this one is very focused on making sure that there's enough room for everybody and that the needs of the society are being met when it comes to transportation and stuff like that. So I'm seeing this institution cooperating a lot with institution number 3 and institution number 1. Number 6, this is probably the most interesting mix. We have health, border security, research, and culture and preservation. So I'm thinking here with the border security, again, the border security, originally I was thinking, oh, well, maybe it's like, customs and immigration. But here I'm thinking this is a very big focus on the customs and not the immigration part. So by border security, we're probably not controlling people going back and forth necessarily. I mean, with heavy amounts of AI and digital life forms and stuff, they can probably bounce around wherever they want, whenever they want, as long as there's a means of powerfully transmitting themselves across the cosmos. So it's kind of hard to probably block off people necessarily, but goods and services might be a major point of concern, especially if you've got issues where certain life forms can't be exposed to certain things or whatever. So I could definitely see, and of course health would be avoiding the transmission of disease and stuff like that. Would be a major component of that. So I could kind of see this as being, a combination of like yes, you have border and customs patrol, but also you've got, CDC. So I'm thinking like the, if you took U.S. Customs and Border Control and mixed it together with, we have a thing in the United States called the Commissioned Service that's involved in the Department of Health and Human Services that basically does a lot of like, health responses and stuff like that, like responses to health disasters or things along those lines, and also helps boost things like hospitals, civilian hospitals and stuff like that when there's problems, because they're technically they're not a military service, but they're a uniformed service. We have, and that kind of ties in with the research where we have basically here we'd have a mixture of, let's say, the National Science Foundation and again, sort of the National Institute of Health kind of blended together. The culture and preservation, I was surprised that wasn't over here with institution number 3, but here I see that this is preserving. Institution number 6 I see is preserving the past and the present, and institution number 3 being preserving the present for the future. Is kind of the way I see that the sort of philosophies of these institutions working. So now basically what I see is just taking a look at the various different other elements that exist within the generator infrastructure and seeing like what sort of institutional authority and if we want to potentially incorporate privatized responsibility confederation, or like what I'll do right now is I'll go ahead and start rolling for institutional authority, and we'll see where it goes from there. All right, welcome back, everybody. So you'll take a look. If you take a look above the sort of institutions that we have listed here on our table, you'll notice that I have added a couple of things. The first thing you'll notice is that I added authority numbers. So again, this was set just by rolling a d6 for each of the institutions and seeing what level of authority it kind of has. Another thing that you'll notice that I have done is I have also added the type of government that each of these, the type of institution that each of these is, and I've also added some colors. So first, let's go over exactly what the different institution types are. For those of you who haven't watched the previous video talking about the government generator, each of these institutions has a type, so that primarily focuses on either, again, whether it is like a government or a public institution, or if it is a private institution. And then the second one focusing on basically the number of actors who are making decisions within this particular institution. To cover the government institutions first, or the public institutions first, we have ministries, councils, and assemblies. So a ministry would be like an executive. There's a single person, or maybe a very, very small group, like maybe 2 or 3, who are acting as an executive that are making the primary decisions for this particular institution. Basically, the buck stops with them. So this would be, for example, a president, a CEO, or something like that. The council is a somewhat larger group of, somewhere between, let's say, 3 and probably 20 or 16 or 12 or something like that. Some smaller number of individuals who are acting together as a group to make decisions. And then, of course, an assembly would be like a legislature of like parliament, or some much larger group of people who are making decisions. Potentially representing others, but also potentially not. Maybe they're just, that's everybody in the group is a member of the assembly. That is also another possibility. Then when we take a look at the private institutions, we have the oligopoly that you'll see there in the middle, which is basically the equivalent of a council. We have a small group of economic actors involved in this particular institution. A good modern example of that might be the tech sector, where there are there might be a lot of smaller actors. There are a small number of large actors that dominate a significant portion of the industry. So like the gaming industry, there's who all do you have that dominates that? You of course have the people who make so you have Sony that makes the PlayStation, you have Microsoft, you have a couple of other actors, like let's say, the people who own Steam, who distribute games, and they have very dominant actors in the industry. Open market would of course be the equivalent of the assembly, where there are there are hundreds, potentially thousands of different economic actors, each of which that don't have a significant amount of influence or power over top of the other, that end up with a domination of the industry. And then, of course, the last one would be a monopoly, which, again, primarily means that you have one major actor who makes a lot of the influencing decisions in that institution. So, of course, here you'll see institution one's an open market. That means there's, again, lots of economic actors, and that this is in the private sector. And then finally, the last thing that you'll notice is, that, again, as I mentioned, the colors. So one of the optional rules for the government generator is that you can have 2 or more levels of government institutions being involved in this process. Or that again are making significant decisions that influence life for regular people within the nation or polity that's being described here. So these could be symbols of some form of confederation or a federation of some sort. In this case, what I'm seeing is kind of like a 3-tiered federation. First, which really fits in, I think, with the fiction involved in this. So this country or this nation that exists, basically, as I mentioned, is several sort of settlements or stellar polities that kind of cooperate together in sort of like a star sector. But that star sector itself is also a part of a much larger sort of supranational organization that loosely cooperates with each other. So I kind of see this as being like, okay, the institutions that are in orange are essentially like, let's say, the country, right? The light yellow institutions that you see there, so that would be institution 3 and 5, would be essentially like at the state level or the regional level. So like each state inside of this country would have an equivalent of these institutions operating within it. And then the pink would be sort of like the supranational level. So this is one where I see that this is a very important institution in this country, but it's not beholden to the country solely. Instead, it has control or influence over a large number of countries or polities, which definitely fits in, since I'm seeing is that with the digital infrastructure and stuff like that, there could be countries within countries where you have entire nations potentially of like digital life that potentially could exist inside of say, a server that's within this country, or that operates outside but still has a strong amount of influence on the way that life sort of operates and in the sort of quote-unquote real world, the physical world that this nation itself actually operates within. So yeah, here's just sort of a good example, and I also drew some arrows to kind of connect who has power over whom and how things kind of connect together. So yeah, this was a sort of practical application of the government generator that we had talked about in a previous video. Links will be in the doobly-doo down below for not only for links for the generator, but also a link to the video where we discussed more in depth the specific rules and the sort of way that the the generator sort of operates. So thank you all for joining us again here today for this Galaxy 24. Don't forget to rate your IT purchases. Have a good zone, and I will see you next time in the universe.